Hi folks, and welcome to our second lecture of week 2. This time we're going to follow up on our discussion about higher education as a case study for understanding sustainability. I don't actually have the video capabilities I normally have for where I'm making this recording right now, so apologies you don't get to see my beautiful face. You do, however, get to hear my voice and see the slides, so we have the main things that we need to get through this content. We've basically been talking about Colgate as a way of understanding how a particular institution, Colgate, and a type of institution, higher education, are grappling with the question of sustainability. What is sustainability? How can we define it? How can we set goals around it, measure those goals, try to test what kind of achievements we have? And so using it as a more specific example of sustainability to probe into some of those ideas that we began the semester with about sustainability as a principle, as a philosophy, and go from there. So in today's lecture, for our lecture number 2 of the second week, I want to talk about that topic a little bit more and follow up on the discussion that we had earlier in the week about Colgate's sustainability plan, the bicentennial plan, and some of the questions we had there about how sustainability was defined. This way, we could say we're almost going to step back a little bit from that discussion of the nitty-gritty of what a sustainability plan entails to question to what extent that definition of sustainability, those practices of sustainability make sense for the larger goals that we might have or that we could set for ourselves. And one way to talk about this, and really this is starting to dig into some of the context of the article that I wrote, The Sustainable University, that we're reading for class on Wednesday, is a way of talking about this set of questions. And I want to just give you a little bit of background about where my argument is coming from. And in part, the argument is based in this idea of the growth machine. Growth machine is a concept developed by a sociologist named Harvey Mollick in a classic article from 1976, way back when, believe it or not, even I was a kid back then, before Star Wars even, called The City as Growth Machine, Toward a Political Economy of Place. This is a classic article. It's an article that's been cited thousands of times and spawned a lot of subsequent research, so really influential idea. Basically what Mollich's argument is that if you look at cities in particular as urban spaces, the economic and political trends that are there are really driven by growth imperatives, a focus on growth by especially real estate development and the cultivation of land into new building developments, shopping malls, districts, residential districts, or commercial districts. There's all kinds of people, and especially the elites, the people who are the wealthiest and have connections to the most resources in these urban spaces, like real estate agents, contractors, builders, the people who actually just own the land and invest in it, politicians who maybe get campaign contributions and can make promises around growth and trying to increase prosperity that way for their constituents and for their donors. They all want to see cities grow and gain more resources. So early on in Mollich's article, he says, the means of achieving this growth, of setting off this chain of phenomenon, constitute the central issue for those serious people, the elites, he means the serious people, who care about their locality and who have the resources to make their caring felt as a political force. The city is, for those who count, a growth machine. So when he's talking about the serious people, the fact that they care, what he really means is people who have the resources to make their opinions known and felt. And those are especially those people in that third bullet point there, the real estate folks, the developers, the builders, the politicians, who are kind of, you could say, have a set of common interests in Mollich's view about growth and how important it is to have growth and continued growth and expanding growth all the time. And so essentially what this means is that urban spaces in particular inevitably tend to grow, and that's the growth machine. I have a question mark there in that last bullet point about the inevitability of it. You know, you could say, well, you don't want to naturalize it and make it sound like cities are these kind of organic entities that just tend to want to grow like a plant or an animal or an ecosystem or something like that, because it makes it sound like there's nothing we can do about it. But I think in particular what Mollich is arguing, kind of in a somewhat neo-Marxist way is that in a capitalist system where there's a profit motive and a growth motive, that's when you have this inevitable growth of urban places, that they get bigger and bigger, they sprawl further and further. And I guess you could say that this is an especially kind of US based argument, and maybe even kind of a Californian based argument. If you think about the cities with the greatest sprawl, places like LA, others that have grown in recent years, they're the ones where this argument really kind of comes from. Malich was writing at the time in California, and so he was looking at these places and saying, yeah, this seems to make sense that these urban spaces are these unending growth machines. So our follow-up question then is, can we consider universities growth machines? And this is part of the pivot that I make in my article on the sustainable university. And basically, the question is, another way of phrasing it would be, are universities also subject to some of the same growth imperatives that Malich argued are part of urban spaces in the way that cities tend inevitably to grow in this model of the growth machine? You can think of universities as an interesting test case, and this is a little bit of a nod back at what we talked about earlier in the week. There are a lot of universities that have signed on to commitments like from ASHE, from Second Nature. Colgate's certainly done this with its pledge to become carbon neutral last year and to have certain sustainability goals that are part of our bicentennial plan. And universities, in that sense, you can imagine them being especially useful places to try out sustainability initiatives. We tend to be interested in developing new knowledge, trying new things, experimenting. So that philosophy, that set of ethics are really kind of built into what we do, and maybe it makes us a really good place for trying out sustainability. Most institutions of higher education in the US, not all of them, but a lot of them, are also not-for-profit. So they don't actually have built into them the imperative to always seek more profit and growth. You could ask some questions about that, and in some cases, universities are being critiqued for having these, not all of them, of course, but some of them have these mega endowments, the Ivy League and other schools with really large endowments. Colgate's is approaching $1 billion. Hamilton College, our neighbor, has more than $1 billion. That's a lot of money to have in the bank. And so the question is, are they really not-for-profit in that regard? But, overall, we don't have shareholders where we're trying to develop a return from quarter to quarter that we're really have as our biggest priority in terms of our stock price or something like that, like companies do. So at the same time, though, that there are definitely motivations for us to grow. There's competition for all different types of resources, like for students, faculty, attracting them here, getting grant dollars, getting support from the state, getting your name out there, name recognition and rankings like the U.S. News and World Report rankings, all the other guides that students use to choose what is the best college for them. Including the sustainability rankings that we talked about in the last lecture, are different ways for colleges to distinguish themselves from their competitors and say, hey, we're greener than they are. Why don't you come to us because we are better for that reason? Land itself is also a key resource for many universities. Colgate owns actually over 1,000 acres of land. In addition to our campus, owns a lot of farmland, a lot of forested land. So land is an important resource for Colgate in our rural space, but in particular for universities that are in more urban spaces, land can be a really valuable resource for them to develop, both in terms of their own campus operations, but also as just kind of an investment or a resource for them to have as part of maybe not their formal endowment, but it is a resource that they kind of have in the bank to use for new buildings or attracting new initiatives from the city or from the state that way. So Andrew Ross in 2012 actually followed up on that thought and wrote this piece in Dissent magazine called Universities and the Urban Growth Machine, definitely following right on from Malich's idea of urban growth machines and saying that universities do actually have this important role in not only making cities grow and grow and grow, but the universities themselves are part of the growth machine, and they're not necessarily separate from it in that way. So here's where we jump into my article then. The last two slides gives you a little bit of context, a little background to understand better maybe where I'm coming from in my argument and how it fits into some of the discussions we're having about sustainability in our class. And I'm using the case study of Colgate, and in particular, early on in the article, I focus on the Trudy Fitness Center. You might even say I kind of pick on the Trudy Fitness Center, and one of the questions I'll have for you at the end of this lecture and in class is, was I doing that in a way that you think is fair? But I'm using our university and this idea of universities potentially being growth machines to question whether or not sustainability work is something that maintains the status quo, or does it actually improve us in terms of those larger, more philosophical goals that we have about preserving opportunities for future generations and about valuing non-human species and ecosystems' interests as well. So I use this concept of repair in the article. Without going into too much detail, repair is something that we use in our everyday life to talk about fixing our car, fixing a leaky piece of plumbing in our house or our apartment or something like that. But I'm using it in a broader way in this article and other research where I've written about this to talk about repair of many different types. It can be repairs of understandings between people where we're trying to get on the same page in terms of an idea or a philosophy, but it also can be repair of institutions, like, say, for instance, an institution like a university or a political body feeling like it's in trouble or it has some threat to its existence or how it gets its resources. You can think of repair in that way, too, is where people are trying to protect their resources and to keep the ship afloat, you might say, so that for an institution or the kinds of landholders that are talked about in Malich's article, repair could be a practice that they use to try to shore up their interest, to try to keep things going in certain ways. One of the ways that I've found useful to talk about repair in that sense is this distinction between maintenance and transformation that I talk about in the article. Maintenance is a way of thinking about repair as keeping things going as they are. And there's lots of examples that I've written about where when people or institutions face challenges to the investment that they have in a particular system, they are likely to want to fix it and keep that going, which makes sense, right? If you have an investment in a piece of land and it floods, you want to find a way to protect that so that you can build houses there or sell it for a real estate development or something like that, right? Transformation, on the other hand, is a more radical shift in the structures that exist politically, economically, materially, and it tends to be resisted by elites or others who have a set of commitments to the existing status quo. So it's harder to enact, and it tends to be more likely to be pushed by people who are part of social movements, who are really looking for a more radical set of shifts. And so you can say that there's this kind of tension between repair as maintenance, keeping things going as they are, and repair as transformation, really shifting the rules of the game, shifting the structures that are behind it to a new set and a new set of commitments. So the question I have in this article, and that I have for you as well, is to what extent do our sustainability commitments and the work that we do to achieve them covered for growth machine imperatives? Do you think the university is a growth machine? And to what extent is sustainability work a part of that? Even if we are pursuing LEED certification, if we have other commitments, if we tend to grow and we use more resources overall, is that really sustainable? Is that sustainable in the broader sense? Is it sustainable in a transformative way? Or is it more kind of keeping things the same and dressing it up so that we can feel good about it, say we're doing the sustainability work, but really maybe we're still kind of growing just like the rest of our society and our world is growing, and using resources that maybe are going to be a danger to the long-term sustainability commitments that we might want to have. So you could say that that's kind of a pain in the ass argument to make, right? Like, here Colgate's doing all these great things. all these initiatives, all these amazing people that are working on this stuff. And I don't want to downplay that. I think it's amazing. And I think we should all be happy for Colgate, pat ourselves on the back. We've won so many awards. There's no way that I would ever want to argue that this is bad stuff. We should continue it. However, is there any merit, do you think, to what I'm raising as a concern, that we could potentially be doing stuff in the name of sustainability, but it really kind of just keeps us going in the same direction on the larger scale, that we continue to grow, we continue to use more resources, and that we aren't really making a transformative change? Do you think that there's merit to that argument? Is there something there? Am I being unfair, maybe, if you don't like the argument? And to follow up on that, then, if we actually did want to have a truly transformative set of changes to a university like Colgate, what would it look like? What kind of methods or philosophies of sustainability would we have if we really wanted to focus on transformative repair? Those are some of the questions we'll talk about in class. I'll see you soon.